Third down and 20.
Travis Etienne, the big news with him is that in rookie camp, he was taking all of his snaps, I believe it was, at wide receiver.
All of them. Not a single snap at running back, which is wild.
And Jake was saying, okay, well, who does this impact the most? And what I said was James Robinson, because right now, James Robinson to the Dynasty community, with the draft pick of Travis Etienne, it was almost death to James Robinson. He is no longer going to ever be an RB1. His ceiling is completely capped. Maybe he's still like a low-end RB2 or an RB3. But with this news and with what we've seen with Urban Meyer at Ohio State, I kind of beg the question, is James Robinson's ceiling kind of being undervalued by the Dynasty community, and therefore his price tag being pretty too cheap for how good he actually is?
What is his price tag right now? That is my question.
That's a good question. I think right now, if you were to look at Keep Trade Cut, he's somewhere in the low 20s of running backs.
So what? You're saying you can get him for like a mid-second round pick?
I think wherever Trey Sermon is going in rookie drafts, like if Trey Sermon's on the board 202 and you offered that to the James Robinson owner, I think the James Robinson owner most of the time accepts that trade.
I think they would accept it, but I don't think I would do it. Like in terms of like being the person buying James Robinson.
Exactly. So I was going to say, I think he's a little bit less than that. So maybe like 204, 205, I'd say, in this rookie draft. Somewhere around there.
So you're telling me he's from anywhere from like 204 to let's call it 6. Somewhere in there.
See, during this segment, I'm going to kind of sound like a James Robinson hater. So I apologize to the James Robinson owners in advance. I wouldn't pay more than a late second for James Robinson.
That's
very
completely
late second.
Fair.
And I actually thought that this news kind of, you know how like James Robinson's value obviously like tanked on draft night. If you still wanted to sell him, I think this news could have kind of helped. I want to see how they play Etienne in actual training camp when the full team is there. Obviously, he did play all of his reps at receiver in this mini camp. And I know in the first take, we mentioned how I could see him having kind of an Aaron Jones role with kind of James Robinson being the Jamal Williams dash A.J. Dillon type. And that's with a high-scoring offense. Like, you have to imagine the fantasy points are going to be lower for this Jags offense, which isn't on Green Bay's level. I'm still not crazy about James Robinson. I think still it's going to end up being Etienne's backfield, getting more touches, getting more receiving game. For me, this kind of honestly boosts Etienne's value for me, especially more in PPR leagues. I think they're going to use him a ton in the receiving game, and I think he's going to be the main back. I think what's going to really be kind of a pain in the ass is like when Etienne owners, he's kind of like the more valuable running back, and then just all these drives you see at the goal line, they give it to James Robinson instead. I could see that happening a lot, kind of like what was happening with Ingram and Kamara a couple years ago. But that's kind of how I view it.
My question to you is, do you kind of see this playing out? Like, obviously not at the same level as the Cleveland backfield, but, you know, Chubb and Hunt, they're both fantasy relevant backs and fantasy productive backs at that too. They're, you know, Hunt finished, I believe, top 12 running backs last year, and you know, Chubb only missed I think 2 games. So like they both were top running back ones, you know, top 12. So obviously I don't think Jacksonville offense can support that, but do you kind of see this playing a little similar where Hunt's a better receiving back than Chubb, he gets more of that third down work, but at the same time they're both productive backs. You can probably start either on any given week, and no one would bat an eye. No one would say that's a bad start.
See, for me, the difference of that situation, I do get what you're saying. It's kind of one's a more receiving back role, one's a more pure rusher, and they're both very productive in fantasy. I just think those two guys' talent level is in like a whole different like universe compared to James Robinson. And both their talent levels are higher than Etienne too.
I mean, Etienne has the most draft capital put into them than either of them.
Hold on, can I get a quick timeout here? A quick timeout. Because there are a couple things I want to interject on this. First off, I understand the preconceived notion, and this was like that at the beginning of the season, that Kareem Hunt was more of the pass catching back and Nick Chubb more of the power back. But if you watch the Browns tape towards the end of the season, when they kind of switched up their offense a little bit and it really
They,
started to get on a roll, it was much more of a Nick Chubb gets a couple drives, Kareem Hunt gets a couple drives.
that's how they basically split it. They basically said, all right, this is Nick Chubb drive. All right, this one's a Kareem Hunt drive. Like they basically left him on the field for a full drive, which I like that. I mean, I think that's a good way to get your running back going. But
And not even just that, they would go a lot of like, I feel like I mentioned it way too frequently, but like a lot of, okay, big power personnel. And then if they don't like the look, or maybe it's just pre-planned, they split it to 5 wide. They would have Nick Chubb lined up as a receiver on the outside and actually
yeah,
use him. He wasn't just a decoy. And this is a guy that was seen as, oh, you could never line him up as a receiver.
his receiving this year was tremendously better than I've ever thought Nick Chubb could be. And like they did use him. They split him out wide and said, run a route, Nick Chubb. And he did. And it was productive doing it. Like obviously we've seen that from Kareem Hunt in the Kansas City offense and all that, but like you never would have expected it prior to this year from Nick Chubb. But credit to him.
The other thing I want to say too is that I'm really glad you mentioned the Browns offense, because we've compared this situation in Jacksonville to either the Packers or the Browns and how they're going to use their running backs, because I think we can all agree that James Robinson and Travis Etienne, regardless of draft capital, are two pretty talented running backs. The fact that we are mentioning them in the conversation of these pretty damn good running backs, and we just saw James Robinson put up 1,400 yards. Like, these are not bad players. They will be utilized. So I actually think that I'm more on Jake's side here, that I expect to see more of a Browns usage of these running backs than a Packers usage, in that while I do think that Travis Etienne will be in that Aaron Jones role, Robinson's just going to get more carries than Jamal Williams did. Jamal Williams, like, there were a couple of games where he got kind of pounded the rock, but in the games where him and Aaron Jones were really both on the field playing, it was, okay, Jamal Williams gets like 6 to 8 carries. With James Robinson in this Urban Meyer offense, I really think this is going to be a team that wants to develop a run-first identity for Trevor Lawrence to help him out. And I kind of think that we're going to see James Robinson be more of the Kareem Hunt, and that he's going to get a few drives and possessions as that actual running back. And instead of 6 to 8 carries, we're going to see 10 to 12 carries, which could really impact his value, especially if they're those red zone carries.
I do think he's going to have those red zone carries, which are going to be big. I'd probably list it at around, okay, so he's going to get much more the first half of the season than the second half of the season, I think, because like James Robinson, well, not that he knows the system, honestly, because it's a brand new system, but he's been there. They may trust the 1-year experienced guy over throwing the rookie in the fire right away. I guess I'm just not as high on James. I think at first it'll kind of be like the Hunt Chubb thing, but I see it turning into kind of that Aaron Jones, Jamal, or honestly, kind of a better one would probably be Kamara, Latavius Murray.
Yeah, I can see that.
Latavius got around like 10 carries a game, and got.
I think that's what you're scared of Robinson becoming, is Latavius Murray, where he's just. I mean, Latavius Murray's not a bad player, but he's. But that's also what he's valued at, right? He's okay at max. He's going to get like 10 points if he scores a touchdown. If not, like, he's getting 10 carries for like 50 yards, 60 yards. So I think that's fair. Now, I guess the other question is, are you going out and buying James Robinson based on this news, or is it still like, okay, we're going to keep him in purgatory? If you have him, hold him. If you don't have him, you're not buying.
I think the move with him is. It's just a hold. I'm not buying. I'm not selling. I think what I would do as an owner or as a potential buyer would just be see how the first few weeks play out. If he has a shit first 2 weeks, right, and the value of him just completely tanks, I mean, like, if he's getting carries and just not producing, I think that's one thing. But if he's just not getting any carries, I think that's another thing. So, like, you get a feel for it. And I think if he's just not producing, but the carries are still there, I think that's a potential buy low for almost nothing, because I think everyone would just assume he's finished. But if he's just not getting carries, obviously they're clearly just going with Travis Etienne, who they just put a first round pick into. Understandable, no draft capital in James Robinson, obviously, as an undrafted free agent last year.
New
It's
coaching
just
staff
a
too.
new coaching staff, exactly. So he's in a very precarious spot, and I understand why people and the Dynasty community as a whole are just very cautious on him.
Yeah, I think I'm a little more optimistic for Robinson than consensus. And I know, Lunas, you kind of alluded to before saying that you're not on the Robinson train. I understand that. I think that most people aren't on the Robinson train. I'm not saying that you should go out and spend 204, 205 on him, but come like Kenneth Gainwell territory where some people are picking him up, I think that that's a pretty damn good price to get a running back of the quality of James Robinson.